The challenges that confront us today are clear. Climate change, racism, economic inequality. Given their sheer size and the country's new leadership, however, less obvious is how to tackle these problems. Do we start at the local or the global level? Ahead on Wide Angle. In late August 2015, my guest today began a 4.5-month, 12,000-mile journey around the U.S. Her objective? To seek out ordinary people and communities who are tackling the challenges that confront us. Climate change, racism, economic inequality, to name a few. What she found were locally rooted efforts doing just that, resisting fracking, confronting the silence of hate crime complicity, and rebuilding impoverished communities. Joining me from her home near Seattle to share what she found on that trip is Sarah Van Gelder, the co-founder and editor-at-large of Yes Magazine, as well as the author of the new book, The Revolution Where You Live, Stories from a 12,000-Mile Journey Through a New America. Welcome to Wide Angle, Sarah.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
It's a pleasure to have you. I think maybe the place to start today is to back up a little bit, and how you frame your work. This book, as well as the broader contribution that you've made over the past 2 decades in your life in journalism. You call it solutions journalism or appreciative journalism. Regrettably, it's something that many Americans, at least by that name, haven't heard of. Can you tell us a little bit about it and how it differs from the media that we regularly see and hear?
The gold standard for media is investigative journalism. It's the watchdog. It's looking for who's the wrongdoer, who's corrupt, who's doing something that we don't like, and revealing that to the public. And I think that's very important. I think it's in a democratic society, we need to have that kind of watchdog role. But there's another role that I think is important as well in a democratic society, and that's what is working. How can we make things even better? If we have some really huge problems, and again, at its best, journalism helps us understand those problems. But if we have these huge problems, who has some answers? Who's got something that's actually working? And how do we know if it's working? And what does it look like? Can we imagine those things spreading and taking hold? So that's what we found at Yes Magazine to do, is to tell those stories, to look for them, to find out what people are doing in their communities, to find out what really works, what actually makes a difference, and then to tell those stories. And that's why we have a name like Yes. It's essentially a celebration of what actually works.
Exactly. We know the challenges, we know it's climate change, it's racism, it's economic equality that I mentioned at the top of the show. But rather than, as you suggest, being paralyzed by these challenges themselves, you took this 12,000-mile journey around the country that I mentioned. In search of some answers. But you didn't go to the power centers that we typically hear from, Los Angeles, New York City, Washington, D.C. In fact, your mission, as you stated, is find out if the places at the margins of our society might have answers. So a different tack than I think is standard. Why that approach, and what answers did you think those places at the margins might have that would be of benefit to all of us?
Well, the thing about the power centers of society is that people can get quite comfortable with the status quo, even if it's not working in some really fundamental ways. So I wanted to go to places where people were not being rewarded for making peace, if you will, with the status quo, where people were saying, we're being left out of this. And we don't see this as ever really achieving the kind of world that we want. And so we're going about making a different kind of a world right where we live. So those were the people that I was really looking for. Yeah. And that's also, I work in a magazine where we do a lot of the work from our offices. Of course, we get out and we talk to people in communities, but I wanted to really immerse myself in the world that people are living in every day, and the world of quite frankly, the people who live in the heartland, people who live in the Rust Belt cities, people who live in Appalachia and on native reservations, people who aren't normally heard from. And I wanted to really take the time, and that's why I drove instead of flew in and did sort of parachute journalism. I call what I did slow journalism. because I wanted to take the time to really hear people and to hear their stories and to hear what's important to them.
Right. And so that's what you did in the revolution where you live. And let's actually shift gears a little bit and speak to some of the places you stopped. Now, you stopped at many different places, and certainly our conversation today could go in many different directions. But I think maybe two particular illustrations that you speak to here in the book might have a particular resonance to people in the Arlington and in the greater Boston communities. Yeah. One of them is what you found in Newark, New Jersey, yeah, which I think shares some parallels with our own Dorchester and Roxbury communities. Yeah. In Newark, instead of attracting wealthy residents and sort of gentrifying blighted areas, yeah, they are reinvesting in those long neglected communities with what is called their Model Communities program. Model Neighborhoods program. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and I guess by extension then, how that may fit for communities around us?
Sure. So I think one of the really interesting things that's been happening in general and will happen even more so under Donald Trump, I believe, is that real innovation, real leadership is going to be coming from the local level, from cities and communities, because frankly, I don't think we're going to see positive leadership coming from the national level. So I was very interested in what's going on in cities. Newark, as far as my trip, Newark was an exception. I usually was looking at what people were doing at the grassroots. In Newark, I was actually interested in the new mayor, Mayor Baraka, in part because he came right out of the grassroots. He came out of years of being a community organizer in Newark, New Jersey, working for some of the most impoverished communities in a city that's one of the most impoverished cities. So I was curious to see what would happen when people in the grassroots actually were elected into office. He's only been in office for a few years. I think it was only 2 years when I first got to Newark. And one of the things he did and his administration did was to choose a couple of the most impoverished neighborhoods, the ones that had been neglected for a long time, predominantly African-American neighborhoods, and say, we're going to start here. Instead of starting with the wealthier places or hoping that a corporation from outside is going to come in and bring jobs, we're going to start with who we already have here and how do we make these neighborhoods work for people who are already here. So the project that I spent the most time with was the Mural project. And so they decided that a facet of this, it's certainly not enough, but a facet of this is to reflect the community back to itself in its beauty, rather than once again telling this message of brokenness, of poverty, of not being enough. So they commissioned a bunch of murals all over these two neighborhoods that were basically talking about the beauty of Newark, beauty of those neighborhoods, and of the African-American culture. And there was a phrase that I found on one of those murals that really stuck with me. It said, "We the people love this place. In fact, we the people call this place our home." And I thought, I'd never thought of Newark that way before. It's not been a city that I had wanted to spend time in before. And I somehow didn't get that for the people who live there, that is home. And they have all these memories of family and community tied up in that place. And they have the right as well to make that place really work for them, for it to be their home and for it to be beautiful.
It's interesting. Arlington itself has a mural project going on right now, wherein we celebrate. Typically, it has some connection to local businesses, and particularly businesses that have been here for a long time, and murals that have a picture of that person, and as well as sort of a bubble, a word bubble, wherein they share a little bit about their stay in Arlington, what the community has meant to them. And certainly I would think that kind of project in any community helps people feel a stronger sense of place and belonging and something to honor. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, I think one of the problems with being immersed in the corporate media world is all the signals we get are that the people in Hollywood are important and glamorous and to be emulated, or the people in Washington, D.C. are important and powerful. But that's not like me. I don't, how can I feel connected to that? Right. And so I think the message underlying all of that is, is we aren't good enough. We aren't powerful. Mm-hmm. We don't really have anything to say. We're not very interesting. So I think it's so important for communities to start turning that around. Right. And one of the ways Murals is certainly one way to do that, to raise up the figures in the community, to raise up the artists in the community as well, right. and show that people have something to say.
We in Massachusetts and the wider Northeast last year enjoyed sort of a climate change local rights victory when we turned the Kinder Morgan natural gas pipeline back. I don't know if you heard that.
I didn't know that.
Okay.
Congratulations.
So thank you. I think that experience sort of allies us a little bit with the people in Standing Rock. Yeah, taking a climate change, this is our backyard, and this is something we don't want. You comment, however, that even if the pipeline is ultimately built, Standing Rock stands as an unblemished victory. So that it surprised me that you said that. So I'm going to ask you why that is.
One is that the whole question of what we value most in the world, whether we value more pure drinking water and the health that goes with that, and what we're passing along to our children, if we value that more, or if we value the profits of a few corporations and a few banks more. That question was really highlighted, and it's something that I think has finally kind of gotten through in a way that's really profound. It's not the only pipeline, as you mentioned. There's other people who are struggling for the same reasons or related reasons, but often it involves pure water, fresh water. And we think we have good protections with the Clean Water Act and so forth, but there's so many places in which fracking is being allowed to infuse groundwater with all sorts of chemicals, and we're in a position where we're not given the choice to not have those actually come into our bodies and affect our health. Right. So it was a place where some people were willing to take that kind of a stand, where they were willing to put their bodies on the line, where they were willing to take the macing and the rubber bullets and the sub-freezing temperatures and the water cannons, because it was so important. It was actually sacred. They were using the term water is life, water is sacred. Right. And I think that even though that comes out of their own particular indigenous tradition, I think it's something that many of us can relate to, that it is so important. Right. So that was one area. A second was how powerful nonviolence turned out to be. Mm-hmm. Because they took that stand and they took it nonviolently, they could gather support from all over the country, in sort of the way that the Selma protesters did when they had dogs and fire hoses aimed at them, in a very similar way with dogs and fire hoses there in North Dakota as well. There was this sense that there's something very powerful about people who refuse to hurt another human being, but also refuse to back down. Mm-hmm. And I think that the ways in which, dozens, perhaps hundreds of other tribes gathered in Standing Rock, and then all those non-native people came along as well, was because of the power of that nonviolent stand. Right. And then the fact that so many tribes came together, that has never happened. I talked to a number of elders when I was reporting there and said, have you ever seen anything like this before? And they said, not since Little Bighorn. Yeah. But even then, they were speaking about the Lakota nations coming together, as far as nations, indigenous nations from all over the United States and from a number of other countries in the world. They had never seen anything like that. Right. So we have now a really powerful, unified Native American movement, I believe, and a number of non-natives who are likewise learning those lessons and learning also to take leadership from a community of color, which is, I think, really an important switch for a lot of the progressive world.
True. Good. Let's take a quick there, Sarah, if we can. And we'll invite viewers to join us on the other side of this public service announcement. We'd love to hear your feedback. Email us at wideangle@acmi.tv. And if you'd like to hear more about this or other Wide Angle episodes, visit us online at acmi.tv/wide angle. Welcome back to Wide Angle. I'm Peter Bermuda speaking with Sarah Van Gelder about her new book, The Revolution Where You Live and Appreciative Journalism. Welcome back, Sarah.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Let's shift gears a little bit. We talked in the first half a little bit about some of the local activism you were witness to on your journey across the U.S. And let's shift to what's currently going on at the national level. Yeah, in Massachusetts, over 60% of voters voted Clinton in the past election. In Arlington, it was almost 78%. So certainly, you could hear upon hearing the election results a collective gasp. Yeah, and I think maybe some sense that while looking at local solutions to problems is almost quaint, now it sort of, is it irrelevant? Do we need to think big? Do we need to think at the national and international level to respond to at least the rhetoric that we've heard from the Trump White House and administration? How do you respond, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, of course, how do you respond to a contention that looking at local solutions to problems just isn't going to cut it in the current milieu?
I actually don't think we have any choice. I think we have to go deeper than we've been going in the past, and that means going into the fundamental questions about how we live our lives and how we live in our communities. So let me just walk through a few of those pieces. One is that the president has used language that has evoked violence against certain populations, or at least implies that might be acceptable. So one of the first things we need to do is make sure that all of our neighbors are safe and that we're safe. And one of the ways we can best do that is in our communities by reaching out to one another. When I woke up on the day after Election Day, I was out at Standing Rock. I crawled out of my icy tent, hoping somebody was going to give me some good news about the election. And when I realized what the news actually was, I just thought of it as like a natural disaster. You know, when a disaster happens, the first thing you do is say, who is most vulnerable here, and how do we make sure they're okay? So that may mean people in the local mosque. It may mean an immigrant community. It may mean women who are offering health services to women. It could be any number of groups, including Jews, who could be targeted. And we don't actually know who will be targeted, and so that means we reach out to everybody, and we say to each other, you know, we've got your back. We're not going to sit still while this happens. If somebody paints a swastika on your front porch, we'll be there with the paint to paint it over, and we'll have drinks afterwards and celebrate our friendship. Right. So it's a way of turning fear on its head and saying, no, we're not going to succumb to fear. We're going to be there for one another. So once you've done that, you have a foundation to do some other important work. You have the foundation to go to your local member of Congress and say, you know what, this policy that is being proposed by the Trump administration, that doesn't work for us, and we want you to stand up against that. So there's ways in which doing the groundwork at the local level is actually where we get the power to make things happen nationally and internationally. And I think for too long we've sort of settled for letting NGOs do the work for us, right? Maybe we write a check, or maybe we sign a petition online, but that's not really enough, and it's certainly not enough in this world that we're entering now. Right. We need to not only have far more influence on what happens at the national scale, but we have to be looking at our own communities and what's working and not working in our own communities, and how do we fix what's not working and create the kind of world that we actually want to live in and that we actually want our kids to inherit.
Right. And let me loop back around and just ask that question a little bit differently. Yeah, would you have written the same book, The Revolution Where You Live, if you had known beforehand the outcome of the election?
You know, I think I would have. Yeah. As it turned out, I went to a lot of the red states that hadn't been covered by the corporate media or even the progressive media in many respects. And I asked those questions of people who were being left out. And so I feel like I was able to learn their stories and learn what they were doing to change their circumstances. people are doing remarkable things, and it's not in the vein that Donald Trump has been promoting for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
People are working on these very thorny questions of racism because they want to get along with their neighbors. There's the number of people who actually just want to exclude other people is a small minority in our country,
Sure.
actually.
Sure. I should say, for readers' benefit, that one of the things you do in the book is, there's no conversation about the presidential campaign in its run-up, yeah, but you didn't pit red states against blue states, yeah, and certainly I think one of the strengths of your trip was traveling amongst red and blue states and talking to people of all sorts and getting their input and seeing what they're doing. The major division you do look at in the book, yeah, is not red versus blue. It's not Republican versus Democrat. It's what you call the culture of connection and the economy of extraction. What are they, and what sorts of futures do each of them sort of open up for us?
So an economy of extraction, I think, is very familiar. It's basically the kind of an economy that treats people and the environment as commodities. So, for example, you might go into one of the places I visited was a beautiful valley in southeast Montana, the Otter Creek Valley. You just see that potential for coal and pull it out of there and make millions of dollars and, sort of clean it up and then walk on because you've extracted the value of it. On the other hand, the people who are living there now, the ranchers and the native people, think of it as a place for connection. They're connected to their ancestors who passed the land along to them. They're connected to the future generations who will still have that land to ranch and to farm. They're connected to the land itself, and they're connected to one another. One of the things I was very struck by is one of the young ranchers who I spoke to as I was traveling. The reason he so much wanted to continue in his parents' tradition and stay on the land was because of the sense of community he had with the other ranchers and with the native people. He just loved that sense that people would look out for each other and that generation after generation, people were going to be there working together as a community. So that's really the distinction. On the one hand, you could have a few corporations who would make an enormous amount of money by pulling coal out of that land. And as they do it, pollute the water, the Tongue River, creates a few jobs, but they're short-term jobs. Ship the coal through a coal terminal on the Pacific coast that the Lummi tribe desperately didn't want. Send that coal to Asia, where people are dying, literally dying by the thousands from excessive coal burning. So really nobody benefits. Everyone has to deal with that poison in exchange for a few people making a huge profit. That's the kind of economy of extraction that we've got. And I found people all over looking to instead build this culture of connection, which is one that can sustain us and actually create a joyful way of life for generations.
Yeah. Very good. If viewers are interested in finding more of this appreciative journalism that we've spoken about today, where would they go to find it?
Well, certainly to yesmagazine.org.
Of course.
We publish a quarterly magazine as well as a daily or so online original articles. They can also look for my website, which is revolutionwhereyoulive.org. And there I post pieces from the book and pieces from my road trip and my column.
Very good. Is there anything else that we haven't spoken of today, Sarah, that you feel would be important to leave viewers with, either how to remain hopeful and engaged, community activism, or appreciative journalism?
Well, I think one of the things I'd like to emphasize is how toxic our society has become as people have gotten isolated. I think we've spent so much time behind screens that we really don't even know what's fake news, what's real news, what's real in a more general sense. And the literature shows that kind of isolation, that kind of social isolation is actually as toxic for us as smoking cigarettes or becoming obese. It's really not how we evolved to live. So one of the things I was so struck by on my trip was how much joy people got from being involved in their communities. You know, a lot of times people think, well, if I get involved, that's going to be a drain and it's going to be a bummer and I'm going to have to interact with people that I'm just not so sure about. And what I actually found was, sure, there's going to be conflicts and there's going to be differences, but the joy that I found and the spiritual nourishment that I found that people got from being with one another, you know, for many of them, I think it's really what made their lives and makes their lives meaningful.
Yeah.
So I just encourage people to not let fear and not let the negativity of the new Trump administration, don't let that hold you back or keep you inside or have you hunker down. Get out into your community, get to know people, talk to people. If you disagree, so what? Find the things you agree on and move forward with those.
Very good. Well, certainly, I want to thank you for joining me today, Sarah. I appreciate your time and commitment and the conversation about the book. Yeah.
And thank you so much for having me, Peter.
Absolutely. I should also say, and I have the honor of saying this to many of my guests, you know, congratulations on a 20th anniversary for Yes Magazine. Yeah. And for the significant devotion of time and energy and commitment that has represented certainly for you, and the gift that is to the reading public of Yes Magazine. Yeah?
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. A pleasure. At the end of the day, a new brand of journalism that is more hopeful and optimistic about the future need not be a utopian escape. In fact, it could be just what our democracy needs. Back in 1981, media scholar George Gerbner described how media violence could lead us down a more repressive path, saying, and I quote, "The most general and prevalent association with media consumption is a heightened sense of living in a mean world of violence and danger. Fearful people are more dependent, more easily manipulated and controlled, more susceptible to deceptively simple, strong, tough measures and hardline postures. They may accept and even welcome repression if it promises to relieve their insecurities." Let's see government in Washington for what it is, by all means, and let's work to bend it to our vision. But let us also dare to light a single candle rather than curse the darkness, investing our energies as well as our hopes in our neighbors and our local communities when and as we can. For Sarah Van Gelder, I'm Peter Bermudez. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Wide Angle.